Babes, hello, hello, hello. Today I'm coming to you with something a little bit different. Ever since Oren and Orson disappeared, obviously they have been heavily on my brain and my soul. And I started seeing a trend. Okay, so I'm bringing you this story. Some people may know it, some people may not. It is a very old story, over 50 years old, okay? But literally, I just found it yesterday. So this is the first time I have heard about it. So now I want to share it with you. All right, so I'm going to tell you the characters in the story before we get into it. There is Lois Jurgens and Jerry Sherwood, okay? Jerry Sherwood is the biological mother to Dennis Jurgens, okay? Lois Jurgens is the adopted mother to Dennis Jurgens. There's also Robert Jurgens, who is the first adopted son to Lois Jurgens, okay? So there's Lois Jurgens, Robert Jurgens, Dennis Jurgens. Dennis' biological mother was Jerry Sherwood. And then there's also Dr. McGee, who is the medical examiner. So here we go. Mother's intuition, a baby lost forever, because mother's intuition is very real, okay? My mother's intuition, like me, not my mother, but mine, saved my oldest daughter's life. So thank God for mother's intuition. So here we go. Lois Jurgen was 34. She was a housewife, right? Here she is. She was a housewife, and she came from a very large family. She had 16 brothers and sisters. Lois and her husband could not have children. They tried for 16 years. They adopted a little boy after 16 years of trying to have their own, named Robert. They named him Robert. 3 years later, they adopt a second child named Dennis. For 2.5 years, Robert and Dennis were as close as brothers could possibly be, right? So here's the husband that she was trying to have kids with. Here is Robert. This is baby Dennis, all right? On a stormy night in 1965, something suddenly awoke 5-year-old Robert Jurgens. And this is his wordings, quote, "I remember waking up hearing loud screams. I went to Dennis's bedroom. I saw Lois picking Dennis up out of his crib. She was yelling, 'Dennis, Dennis, Dennis.' His arms were limp like a towel. He was swaggering. His arms and legs, and something was wrong. His head was moving back and forth uncontrollably." 2 days later, 3.5-year-old Dennis Jurgens was laid to rest. The official explanation was that Dennis had been injured in a fall, and he had died of peritonitis, an infection of the lower bowels. For 15 years, little Dennis I'm sorry. For 15 years, little Dennis laid in St. Mary's Cemetery. The cause of his death? Unquestioned. Until his biological mother decided to search for her son. 15 years before, Jerry Sherwood had become pregnant with Dennis while she was a teenager, living in a delinquent home for girls. Being a ward of the state, she was forced to give her son up for adoption. Even though Jerry Sherwood eventually married and had 4 children of her own, she never forgot about that little boy that the state took from her. I called Scott County's, this is Jerry Sherwood talking, quote, "I called Scott County Welfare Department. 6 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Sorry to inform you that Dennis Craig Jurgens died April 11th, 1965. Peritonitis. Sincerely." Now that Jerry found out that Dennis had died, she wanted to say goodbye, to see her son she barely knew. She decided to go to the mortuary when Dennis' funeral had taken place, right? Those are her kids. That's Jerry. Okay, that's the funeral home. Here she's not only found her son's burial records, but also old faded newspaper clippings. One sentence in particular caught her eye. There was a newspaper article that said Dennis Craig Jurgens was found in the crib and his body bore multiple injuries and bruises. And the first thing I did was I looked at my friend, my daughter, my son, and I said, my son was beaten to death. I knew it. I felt it. Jerry Sherwood became obsessed with finding out what happened to Dennis. She enlisted the help of her 18-year-old son. Quote, I had told my son, I want you to go back. I want you to go to the library. I want you to get everything you can. Because it said in that first article I saw that the coroner was investigated. So I figured there would be other things in the paper. There wasn't. My son could only find that one article. And I said, while you're doing that, I'm going to make some phone calls. It was her phone call to the medical examiner's office right there, Ramsey County, that would trigger an official investigation into the death of Dennis Jurgens. Dr. Michael B. McGee, medical examiner. Quote, is the doctor talking, the first time I heard the name Dennis Jurgens and a woman named Jerry Sherwood came in and said that she investigating her son's death and she wished to know how her son died in Ramsey County in 1965. Dr. McGee obtained the official records of the first autopsy. To his surprise, the file contained photos that were shocking and revealing. Got a little boy laying on an autopsy table, completely nude and just covered in bruises. His face is covered with them. He has a large bruise on his forehead region. His abdomen is distended. I said, well, this is a homicide. And I said, we need to find out what's going on. In order to confirm Dr. McGee's conclusion, authorities exhumed the body of Dennis Jurgens. When they opened the casket, I'm not going to show you the pictures, all right? I might put that in a separate video. When they opened the casket, to everyone's surprise, after lying in the ground over 20 years, the body was remarkably preserved. There was no human explanation on why he was so well preserved. You could see the fingernail marks behind his ears, and that there was a purple spot on the tip of his wee-wee. One of the medical examiners says, you know, if I was a betting man, I'd say that that was a bite mark. And it pretty much stopped everybody in their tracks. Melinda, an attorney, said Dr. McGee examined the mummified remains of Dennis Jurgens, hoping to find specific injury that caused his death. I found the bowel. It was about 2:30 in the morning. In the mid-portion in the bowel, there was a defect present. That was the defect that caused the bowel to spill contents into his cavity and caused the death of the child. Dr. McGee concluded that the injuries caused to Dennis could not have been caused by accident. Dennis's injury, you must understand, were delivered to organs deep set into the body, the bowel. The injury required deep set energy. And aside from automobile accidents, a child could not generate that much injury just from a fall. The prosecutors were now convinced that Lois Jurgens had tortured and beaten Dennis to death, her adopted son. The nature of how she did it was unknown. I think I know, and it's about to be said. Hold on. But his back had to be on a solid surface, a floor, a wall. When she struck him with something in the abdomen to push his bowel into his spine and sever the bowel, the doctor said it was train wreck force. Okay? In 1987, out of the Supreme Court of Minnesota, Lois Jurgens, now 62 years old, was brought to the trial for the murder of her adopted son, Dennis Jurgens. In attendance was Jerry Sherwood. Robert Jurgens, now a young man of 27, came to testify against his adoptive mother. He took the stand and described what it was like growing up at 5 years old in the Jurgens home. Quote, "She'd pull your ears, she'd whip you with a belt, or the cedar board." Okay? The cedar board. That stuck out to me. That's what I feel like was probably hit into his stomach while he was either on the floor or against the wall, and that's what ruptured it. But that's just my own conclusions. I remember her grabbing Dennis from the back of the ears and forcefully submerging his head under the water. And I remember him gasping when he had come up for air and crying. To Robert, the autopsy photos shown to him were not a surprise. Quote, "When I viewed those marked photos, that is exactly how I remember seeing Dennis all the time. So it wasn't a real shock to me. That's how I saw Dennis." Based on the forensic evidence, Robert's testimony, Lois Jurgens was found guilty of murder in the 3rd degree. For Jerry Sherwood, her 6-year fight for justice was finally over. Or was it? Lois Jurgens was from Minnesota. She was the adopted mother of 6 children. She adopted 6 children in the 1960s and 70s and brutally abused them all, killing one of them, 3-year-old Dennis Jurgens. She was sentenced to up to 25 years in prison. She was 61 when she went to prison, and she only served 8 years after being paroled. She died May 7th, 2013. When Lois was released from prison, Jerry Sherwood's world came crashing down on her once again. Jerry said, "May God strike her dead." That's what I have to say to Lois Jurgens. I prayed for 8 years she'd die in prison. It's kind of hard to believe. How could you take a baby's life and beat him for 2 years, then walk free? There is no justice. None. So do you think there was justice? How do you feel about the adoption systems? I want to know your thoughts. 6 adopt children, a cover-up from the first ME, all of it exposed by a mother's intuition. Because it's real. I love you, babes. I will upload a video just showing you guys all the gruesome things she did to this child. And maybe we'll actually do an EVP and try to reach out to this baby. Who knows? I love you, babes.